get started, just so everybody knows everyone's on the same page. So we've been doing these events. The idea is I'm an undecided voter, and I assume some of the people in the room are as well. And but I feel lucky in that we have some really interesting candidates. And I think the idea of this event is to just get to know the candidates in a more personal way, have a conversation, kind of one-on-one. But then we will also open it up to audience questions. So we'll do about 25 minutes or so, just us talking, and then we'll switch over to audience questions. The way we want to do audience questions for people out there, you probably see some little note cards and pens on your tables. If you have a question, you could write it down on the note card, and then we'll have Anastasia, our bartender, is going to come around and pick all those up, and then that way. We're also live streaming, so people will be able to hear if I'm reading the question. They'll be able to hear it well. Also, everybody will have an equal chance of their question being asked, because I'll just kind of randomly pull them out of a jar. So that's basically how it's going to roll. And yeah, I suppose we can get started. Thank you so much for coming up here. We appreciate it. I wanted to start with actually just a funny little story. It was probably like 12 years ago. No, probably like 2012. I was working for USAID, and I was over in Africa, and it was one of these, we had to do like a group training or whatever, and there's always an icebreaker, and the icebreaker question, like as they're going around, they're like, if you could talk to any person in the world, alive or dead, someone from history or someone from the present, who would it be? And when it got to my turn, I said Nelson Mandela. And I don't get to talk to Nelson Mandela right now, but you are the other Mandela, like on your Instagram. So I'm calling it a win. Yeah. Like, I think this is pretty cool. But I want to ask, like that, that name. It's, he was a pretty amazing guy, Nelson Mandela. Like, how's that namesake? Like, how do you think about it? Like, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, and I'll share one, sort of funny story before I get into that, because me being the last candidate here, it could be my apprehension to come into Mount Horeb. It's the only place I've ever broken a bone. Tyrell Basin, enough said. I got a little too crazy in the snowboard park, and then I broke my humerus. It was like really bad. It was like a snap. Yeah, so that was my first experience here.
We won't break any bones, I promise.
Please, that would be great. But I've been back since. I've been in Blue Mounds to do Horribly Hilly a few times. So okay. Been on the bike, and yeah, I've done that ride twice with friends, and just put myself through a lot of torture and punishment. So I guess that's why I'm back in politics, running for office again. It's the torture and punishment. But to get back to the Mandela part of things, it's so unique. I think about him as a figure and spending 27 years in prison. And he was 27 years old, or I was 27 years old, when he died. And it just created just this perspective of this is my entire life that I've spent. And he spent that much time behind bars. He didn't come out bitter. He came out motivated to implement real change all across, not just South Africa, but change that will be impacted across the whole continent and across the whole globe. And there's never been a more motivating figure, certainly because I have the name, and growing up, everybody's like, oh, you got so much to live up to. You got so much to live up to. I'm like, yeah, thank you. Like, I do have a lot to live up to, because it does feel as if, I carry a bit of the legacy very deliberately, because I don't want to bring shame to the name. But I also think about, my father who named me Mandela, and my grandmother was not having it. And it's because Nelson Mandela was still, in prison when I was born. And my dad was just way more in tune with, global affairs and events, him being an active member of UAW. UAW is very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And this is where I got my spirit of service and activism from. But my grandmother, she was very upset that my dad would dare to name me after somebody who was in jail. And in the end, my dad won that debate. And I'm glad he did decide to go forth and name me Mandela. And, growing up and learning about the legacy and not really appreciating it in my youth, but as an adult, taking it in as much as I can and thinking about the other Mandelas that also do exist, who were named after him. And I think that we all have a common thread, and there's a certain purpose that I do feel I need to live up to a degree.
How did you find your way into politics?
How did I find my way into politics? So I got my start as an organizer, doing interfaith organizing. When I was in college, actually we can even go back further than that. In high school, my parents got me involved in a number of organizations because they wanted me to be as busy as possible so I could not get in trouble, and it worked. That's why I always talk about making sure that our young people have something to do, something to look forward to, something that keeps them out of trouble, keeps them out of harm's way to the greatest extent possible. But my parents involved me in a number of different organizations. When I got to college, my major was mass communications, media communications, broadcast journalism. And 2004, Barack Obama gave his DNC speech, and it changed my trajectory completely because the level of inspiration that I felt when I heard that speech, he spoke like nobody else had spoken, at least who I've been paying attention to. And I was, cognizant of, politics and political activity. My dad would take me to vote every single election. He would make me get a sample ballot so I could become familiar with names and familiar with positions and different offices. But I don't come from a political family at all. I don't come from a wealthy family. If you've seen the commercials, my mother was a public school teacher. My dad worked third shift. That is my life. But I got inspired while I was in college, and when I finished school in 2008, it was the perfect time to get involved. It gave me a chance to see if this was something I really wanted to be engaged in. And I became an organizer on a campaign, was in Louisiana, working on a congressional race. And it felt good because, the speaking part, the communication piece of it, that I spent my time in college studying, and even our high school had a broadcast journalism program. Just communicating with people and actually building something from the ground up was very inspirational for me. And I stuck with it. Went back to Milwaukee after that race in 2008. I became the receptionist in the mayor's office. Then I took some other roles in workforce development and working with our youth jobs program. But ultimately, I got back into issue-based organizing with an interfaith social justice organization. We took on issues of jobs and economic development, education, immigration reform, and treatment instead of prison. And it felt as if our state had been failing us in each of those issue areas. This was a time when Scott Walker was governor. And that's what compelled me to get back into issue-based organizing, because when he took on unions, public sector unions at that point, I knew that any opportunity that I had in my life was based on the fact that my parents were union members. It was the fact that they were paid a fair wage. If I got sick, they could take off work and not worry about being fired. I knew that the middle class foundation that I got to benefit from was based on that union membership. So I took it very personally when Scott Walker dropped the bomb, launching his war on public sector unions in Wisconsin. And I got involved, like I said, in organizing. And then just a year later, in 2012, I ran successfully for the state assembly.
And then you went on and became lieutenant governor.
That also happened. I became lieutenant governor of Wisconsin. It was a high honor because, like I said, I got into issue-based organizing because Scott Walker attacked everything that I held dear. And to be on the ticket in 2018, the ticket that eventually and finally got rid of Scott Walker, that ended the Scott Walker era, is a point of pride for me. And as we know, election results, winning a campaign, that's one thing. But fighting to deliver the real change that families across the state so desperately deserve, that is the most important part. That has always been my focus. So many people, you see get into office and unfortunately start to stagnate because just simply winning the election was enough for them. But I was born and raised right in the city of Milwaukee, in the heart of the 53206 zip code. That is our state's poorest. It is the nation's most incarcerated zip code. The things we're talking about, not just with this campaign, but ever since I first set foot in the public square, are the things that have impacted me very personally and very deeply. When we talk about this affordability crisis that is impacting so many families across this state and across this country, it's not a new conversation. It's not a new conversation for myself. It's not a new conversation for my friends, my family members, my neighbors. And I've witnessed so many people who went to the same schools that I went to, people who lived in the same neighborhoods that I went to, people who I share a bloodline with, whose lives turned out drastically different than mine. And I was able to be okay because, again, I didn't have to worry about where my next meal was going to come from, never had to worry about where I was going to spend the next night. My parents weren't wealthy by any means. They still struggled to pay the bills, but the basics were met. And unfortunately, that was considered a luxury to so many people that I was around. And so this fight isn't something new. It's not something I'm just showing up to now because it's popular to take on issues of economic opportunity or to take on this level of inequality that we are experiencing in this country that has led to us creating the world's first trillionaire. There's a broken system, but that system has been broken for a long time. The pain is starting to be felt in other places, but that has been people's lived reality. And the worst part about it, it has been people's ignored reality for generations. But now we have a real chance to finally break that, to bring opportunity back to communities. And I mentioned the zip code because it's important to note that it was not always that way. It was not always the state's poorest. It was not always the nation's most incarcerated. My granddad moved to Milwaukee after his service in the Navy during World War II. He got a job as a union steel worker. He was able to create a middle-class foundation that I get to benefit from today. He didn't go to college, but he was able to purchase a home. And now for people in my age group, people who are younger than me, who've worked hard, got a college degree, got an advanced degree, find it more difficult to get their first home than it was for my grandfather in the 1950s. And that is an indictment on our society. That is something we have to fight desperately every single day to fix.
So, as I mentioned before, you are the fifth candidate we've had here. And I'm not going to lie, I liked all four of the other ones.
Yep. I do too.
But so why Mandela Barnes? What why do you think you're the right person for the job?
Well, I can say this comes down to my unique experience. We can talk about my time as lieutenant governor, can talk about my time in the state legislature, but it comes down to the personal experience on top of all that uniquely prepares me for the moment that we are in. I have consistently taken on the tough fights. I've taken on the tough fights when they were not popular, when people laughed at us for suggesting a $15 minimum wage in 2013, when people said that fighting for health care was not going to be a prudent venture because it wouldn't be the reality, when we talked about issues of racial and economic justice, when we talked about criminal justice reform, and people said it would never happen. Those are the fights that I was proud to engage in because it was the right thing to do. I have friends who have gotten caught up in the criminal justice system, family members, classmates who have gotten caught up in the criminal justice system, and I know what that impact has meant for their lives and their ability to be able to progress and move forward because we don't have a system of rehabilitation. We have basically a warehousing industry where people go in and they come out with very few options. And having lived this, and not this being boiled down to campaign talking points, again, is why I fight so hard. I have had the great fortune of experiencing the very best that Wisconsin has had to offer. Have traveled this state extensively. And on the other side of that, I've also witnessed the absolute worst that this state has had to offer. But because of that, I know that things can be better. I know that world-class education shouldn't just be reserved for the wealthiest school districts in this state. I know that a clean energy future is possible because if Republican-led states like Iowa can invest in renewable energy, there's no reason Wisconsin shouldn't be doing it. I know that we have a real ability to change the dynamics of racial inequality and racial justice that have made it difficult for everybody, regardless of where you live. I've traveled enough and experienced rural Wisconsin in a way that I've been able to seamlessly connect the dots and have the same exact conversation that I have in Milwaukee as I have in Cadott. Now, that factory where my grandfather worked, like so many other factories across the state, does not exist. Not as if people got tired of working. It's not as if people's lives just got that comfortable where work just became an option. It's because of corporate greed. It's because of these corporations, these executives who felt that they can make more money by sending our good-paying jobs to other countries. And we are still paying the price in communities all across Wisconsin. There are shuttered factories in every part of this state, and we also see the decline of our family farms, and we see these corporate takeovers. We see big tech showing up and deciding they want to build a data center, which would inhibit any sort of economic activity except to benefit the wealthiest in our society. We're talking about trillion-dollar companies. I have seen the best, and I've unfortunately seen the worst, but that has given me a perspective that is so unique in this campaign, and it's what gives me the drive to continue to fight until we change things for the better, and it's a fight that I'll never let up.
So I want to ask a question about race. I think, I just last night I finished a documentary about the Civil War and Abe Lincoln and emancipation. And, as a kid, you hear the story like, oh, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and everybody lived happily ever after. And at least that's the story I was taught as a kid. And it is not that simple, obviously. And here we are in Wisconsin, and we're actually the most segregated state of all the 50 states. You mentioned Milwaukee having the most incarcerated county, and I think, I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, you were Wisconsin's first black lieutenant governor. You would be Wisconsin's first black governor. I'm curious, just as you're going through this campaign, like what does race mean to you, and how are you thinking about it? What insights do you have for all of us?
Yeah, so on the topic of race, like, it's a conversation a lot of people shy away from because it's uncomfortable, it's challenging, it's difficult. But I can tell you the other side continues to use race to divide us as a people. And even going back to the perceived urban-rural divide, because it's just a notion that regressive and nefarious actors like to use to keep us separate, when our politics aren't necessarily left and right at that level. They aren't red or blue, it's top and bottom. It's those folks, again, who've made out like bandits, and everybody else who's been left scrambling for crumbs. Now, on the topic of race, like, we do have highest rate of black male incarceration. We have some of the deepest disparities in educational outcomes, in economic opportunity. And a lot of this has happened by way of legislation and legal means, like redlining. There have been racial covenants in many communities across the state and across this country that have kept black people from the American dream. My grandfather, I talked about, coming back from World War II, he didn't have access to the GI Bill. And that was the case for so many other black people who put everything on the line for this country. I was reading this book called Half American that talked about this issue specifically. And so you mentioned the Civil War, you mentioned slavery in this country, and that is a part of our founding, that is a part of who we are, and there hasn't been the real come to terms of how things actually came to be, because it feels like nobody wants to take responsibility, but nobody was around then. And I think that the sooner we are open and honest about the dialogue and have the real conversation without it turning political, because every Republican would rather have us not talk about these issues. If you have a conversation about diversity, if you have a conversation about equity, or you have a conversation about inclusion, and I'm saying those three words separately because if you say DEI, then you face some level of political backlash. But the point is, there are too many people who are comfortable not having the uncomfortable conversation. And I'm assuming people in this room have been in relationships before. Sometimes you gotta have uncomfortable conversations if you wanna progress, if you wanna move forward, if you truly wanna come to terms and build a society that truly functions as intended, or at least as stated. If we are truly gonna build a foundation that allows opportunity for the next generation, you gotta have those tough conversations. And it's not about finger pointing. It's not about playing the blame game. This is about coming up with a real resolution to allow for everybody to have equal access to opportunity. And that cannot happen if you have historically marginalized communities that have been kept back for generations from the American dream. You can't sit and say, well, why are educational outcomes different for this community? Why is economic opportunity different for this community? Well, you're talking about communities who've had opportunities to build generational wealth and communities that haven't. Of course things are going to be a little bit different. Of course things are going to be distorted. And so I look at moving forward here in Wisconsin as taking on the common enemy that has actually kept everybody back. We have to address and take on corporate greed relentlessly, because it still benefits from that broken system that's kept people behind based on lines of race. It is still very evident right now, and we have a president who will use every opportunity at his disposal to keep people separate and to keep people from the opportunities that they deserve. And in spite of it all, in spite of any level of discrimination, in spite of any level of segregation or racism, we should fight back twice as hard. And it takes people coming together, understanding that we're so much stronger as a society when we can all move forward in unity. If any community is left behind, that is a drag on every community.
I want to ask a very different question about race. This race I'm talking about is a triathlon. And a fun fact is that I actually competed against you in a triathlon a couple of years ago. I saw your name on those. I don't know if you saw my name on the results, but I did see your name. So my question is, who do you think won?
You obviously won.
I didn't. You kicked my butt. This old dad bod doesn't move that swift. But
Which one was it?
it was the what's it called? The one in what's it called by the brewery there? Why am I blanking on the name of it? It's like east of Madison.
Is
Not
that Partyville?
Not Partyville. What the heck was it?
Lake Mills?
Lake Mills.
Lake Mills.
That's the one.
Lake Mills.
Yeah, Lake Mills. So, yeah, I was in the middle of the pack somewhere. You did pretty good, I think.
I did okay.
But no, I want to ask. So you are you still finding time to like exercise and stuff during the campaign?
Yeah, I still find time to exercise. Honestly, if I didn't, I would go crazy.
Yeah,
just because it's like it's great for stress management and just like keeping myself, like the hours in the calendar that you keep on the campaign trail is absolutely impossible. I have, my closest friends, people I went to high school with who I'm still friends with to this day. It's like I just don't get to see them. We don't get to hang out. Anytime I ever hang out, it's very impromptu, where it's like, I realize an hour before that I have some time. Like, hey, can you be here? Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. But being able to keep up that sort of rigorous, legitimately take a level of physical fitness to do so as well, because you can truly, truly crash and burn quite easily. So while you would definitely beat me in a triathlon today.
No, I wouldn't.
You might. You gotta believe in yourself, man. I still keep up some level of activity. I still run a bit, try to bike when I can. It's just harder to do so. I've only been in a pool twice this year though.
Yeah, I think I did a race against my kids are on swim team, and I got to race against the kids a couple weeks ago. It was fun.
Yeah.
Beat some 8-year-olds. Anyhow, back to governing stuff. I'm curious what kind of leader you are. Especially when things get hard, and maybe being an endurance athlete feeds into the type of leader you are. Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, like, you get to a certain point, and since you brought up triathlon, I did Ironman a couple years ago, and training for Ironman, like not competing in the race, the training for it truly like rewires you. Like, it rewires your brain. And I don't know if it's for better or worse yet. But it changes something in you. And, I'm looking at Emma back here because I've been trying to convince Emma to do Ironman for a long time. We'll get to that conversation later. Just a little crowd work. But what I'll say is it's like created sort of a level of intensity where you feel like you can do almost anything. And sometimes you need somebody to rein it in. And I'm so fortunate to have the team that I have. Like, I have staff that I trust with my life. And having that sort of team around you that can also check you. You have to have people, one, who are smarter than you in the room. You also have to have people that you are willing to listen to. And I've seen people before who run operations where they are, quote unquote, the smartest person in the room, or they will have a bunch of yes people around them. And that is the least effective way to exhibit leadership. Because I feel like every day I want to learn something new. And that's one of the coolest experiences that I had as lieutenant governor. It felt like I was learning something new every day, a new experience, a new idea, a new thought, a new fact. And even throughout the course of this campaign, I want to learn something new every day, and having people around me that can say, hey, Mandela, that is a terrible idea. Because when you're out for a run, that's where I like to think I come up with some of my best ideas. And then I get back to the office, I'll explain it to Darby, and I'm like, oh, that's a terrible idea. But having people who can check you at that level is something that is good for leadership. But in terms of how I show up, I want to make sure that we are bringing as many people on board as possible. I want people whose voices typically haven't been at the table, people who felt like they have been ignored because they actually have been ignored, to be a part of at least the thought process, if not the decision-making process. I think that is very important. I think that it is vital. I think that because of political thought, political process has been so homogenous for so long, politics has been reserved to those who are already well-connected or those who are already wealthy, and it's one of the reasons why we're digging ourselves deeper and deeper into this hole. And in order to fix the problems that we have, in order to address the challenges that we have, it's going to take some different mindsets to be a part of the process. And I think that if everybody at the table has the same exact experience, you are never going to come up with a viable solution that positively impacts everybody. You're going to come up with a solution that benefits the group who is at that table, and that's the group that has typically been at every single table, and that's something we have to fight to change too.
Oh, thank you. I got to check out we are on time, make sure I'm not overrunning it. Okay, I'll ask you just like a couple more questions, and then we'll switch over to audience questions.
All right.
So you ran a campaign for your Senate that was extremely competitive, and I'm sure there was loads of money in that one on both sides, and you got like this close.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you get asked the question all the time, like, oh, if you didn't beat Ron Johnson, how are you going to beat Tom Tiffany? But yeah, asking in the same vein, like, what did you learn in that race that you're taking to this gubernatorial race?
For sure, and I'm glad that you brought that up because honestly, I think that race is one of the things that uniquely prepares me for this one. Now, from the very beginning, was counted out. People questioned whether I could win the primary, let alone the general. And it ended up being the closest U.S. Senate race in this state, almost in the history of Wisconsin, but at least in 100 years. And it was the closest challenge to any incumbent across the entire country. No incumbent lost statewide in 2022. And I always start the answer by saying that a debt of gratitude is owed to the thousands of volunteers, the hundreds, thousands of grassroots donors that showed up to support that campaign. We raised more money than anybody ever in the history of the state without taking a dime of corporate PAC money. And that record still stands today. And one thing too, like you think about a race when it's that close a lot. Sometimes you'd rather just get blown out. It's just like, oh, man, maybe I shouldn't have done this. But when it's 1 point, when it's 26,000 votes, there's 26,000 what ifs. You think about how you could have closed that gap. Oh, what if we had another week? Oh, what if we had another $1 million? And you think about the impact of money in politics. While I'm proud of the grassroots support that we received, the reality is on the other side of that, we were the target of the largest super PAC in the country targeting any one Democrat. There was $50 million spent against us. And while Washington Democratic insiders didn't see the race as winnable, they didn't think we could get it done, the people who knew for sure that we could win was Republican billionaires. And they put $50 million into super PACs to spend against me. That being said, I got my start as an organizer. I still see myself as an organizer. We are going to continue to organize. And the lessons you learn is that it is important to continue to show up in spite of big money being spent, and you truly have to out-organize. But this campaign is a little bit different. It is a different situation. It is a different point in time than we were in 2022. And the distrust that so many people, not just in this room, but all across the state, have for Washington is palpable. And with Tom Tiffany being the Republican nominee for governor, he is responsible for all of the problems that we have been facing. And I don't say that with any level of hyperbole. When we look at how the war in Iran continues to drive up gas prices, continues to drive up diesel prices, fertilizer prices, making it difficult, if not impossible, for many of our family farmers, the tariffs that have devastated small businesses and family farms. A person who said that if you're afraid of artificial intelligence taking your job, then you need to find a new job. A person who still peddles false election claims about 2020 is a person who is completely unprepared to lead this state. And this campaign isn't just going to be based on how bad he is or how bad he has been. This is about our values and our vision. Now, if we rewind time to 2018, that race was also decided by 1 point. And being on both sides of the coin, you know that it feels a whole lot better when you win. But when you win, you think you did everything right. When you come up short just 1 point, you have a lot of time to think and reflect on how to make things better. Now, I've spent the last few years back in my roots as an organizer. And I led an organization called Power to the Polls, and we implement the largest independent grassroots effort to turn out voters, because since 2012, we've seen a steep decline in black voter participation specifically. And this has been the case all across the country. And a lot of folks have made it up with suburban voters, but why not have both? And so with Power to the Polls, we ended up pushing Milwaukee to having the highest voter turnout of the 50 largest cities in the entire country. And so for those 26,000 votes that we may have come up short, we have been doing the organizing work. We have been building the infrastructure independently to come up with 100,000 new votes to make sure that we will win this November.
All right, let's move on to some audience questions. Many local communities are concerned about massive data centers and large-scale utility bills. How do you balance the need for economic growth with protecting water and land?
So when we talk about economic growth, so often we've seen economic activity come at the expense of people's livelihoods. We've seen big tech, we've seen social media companies get away with whatever they want. There's been limited to no accountability. Congress has not stepped in to put any guardrails in place, and I can tell you there should be no new data center construction unless there are guardrails in place. And I don't care if it takes 1 year, I don't care if it takes 5 years. We need a strict set of standards. And to be honest, it's not even that strict. We would expect them to act as any other business. There's no other industries that are using up as much water or driving up people's energy costs like these data centers are. And not only do we need to implement those guardrails and a set of standards, they need to be retroactively applied to any existing data center as well. And we have to have mechanisms in place for environmental impact review. which would make sure that water quality is not negatively impacted in any way. They also have to have a commitment to renewable energy to put power back into the grid. And there has to be a community benefits agreement to make sure that communities aren't on the hook when these data centers go away, because we've dealt with stranded assets from utility companies, and communities are always on the hook. And there should be not a dime of public money going into these data centers as well. They don't need to be subsidized. These are trillion-dollar companies. And if you can't, and if you can't play by the rules, if you can't meet these standards, then you don't belong in Wisconsin.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it feels like we've been in a race to the bottom, and we don't want that.
Well, we've done this before with Foxconn.
Yeah.
And how did that work out? It was a terrible idea back then. And you think about, like, so we're talking about billions of dollars in incentives. Now I'm on a tangent because, like, I think about what we could do to spur small business growth in this state. Small businesses employ the majority of people. And if we have billions of dollars to hand out to billion and trillion-dollar companies, we can uplift so many more small businesses across Wisconsin. Think about how many businesses are struggling right now. And those small businesses are the same ones who don't just have a footprint, but have actual roots in community. And these are the folks who are going to be there regardless. These are the people who have put in everything to hire locally, to give jobs to young people, to be a presence, to often, offer favors to communities, sponsoring, local sports leagues. And they're getting the short end of the stick. And it's an irresponsible way to do things.
Yeah, just to second what you just said. We're a small business, and back in 2018, we got a small grant from DATCAP. I think $24,000. So we weren't asking for billion-dollar subsidies. We got $24,000 when we were just starting out, and it just helped us with the things that are hard to get when you're starting out. Like, we can get a bank loan for a building and equipment, but they don't want to pay for working capital. Like, a bank's not going to loan you that. And we had to take out, a home equity line of credit on our house to get our business started, and just that little $24,000 grant, like, honestly, we wouldn't be here without it. And people who are regular customers here, what we do here, and that what value this place is for our community, and we buy all our stuff from local farms. And so yeah, I think I'm just totally agreeing with your point there. All right, next audience question. What did you do as Lieutenant Governor? Focus or theme? I think I saw you once had a comment that it was all about ribbon cutting or something like that. But I assume you did more than that.
Yeah, no, certainly did a lot. I made that comment in jest about the, we had a joke they were going to give me some novelty scissors. Look, you do a lot of ribbon cutting. That does happen as Lieutenant Governor. But I can confidently say that I have been the most active and engaged Lieutenant Governor in my lifetime. And I led our climate change task force. That was the bulk of my work because that was my focus. And Governor Evers and I had a really good working relationship. And that's what made all the difference because he trusted me. And when we first got elected, he said, well, what are you interested in? What do you want to take on? And I told him I wanted to address climate change to the best of my ability. I wanted Wisconsin to be a leader. And to run even further, I think about election night, because that race was called so late. Polls closed at 8. I was like, all right, well, I'll have a beer. And then I had my beer, and then 9 o'clock showed up. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll have another. And then 10 o'clock showed up, then 11 o'clock showed up. I'm like, oh, this is taking a while. And then 1 a.m., they called it. And I'm just like, oh, I've had a few beers. And as soon as I took the stage, I said, the first thing that came to my mind, I said, we're bringing science back. And it was, at a time where the former governor routinely purged scientists from the Department of Natural Resources, couldn't talk about climate change. And that was something that was near and dear to me. And I told Governor Evers that's what I wanted to take on. And so let our climate change task force put together bold solutions to address the climate crisis. Out of that task force came our state's first clean power plan to get us to 100% carbon-free emissions here in Wisconsin. And there's still so much more work to be done. Obviously, as time has progressed, we need to accelerate our goals because the legislature has done little to nothing to help us meet those goals. But that was the hallmark. That was the focus of my time as lieutenant governor. But when I wasn't handling that, I got to lead our Census Complete Count Committee, got to head up our Health Equity Council, getting that off the ground, our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives Task Force, got to focus on some rural prosperity initiatives as well, and led the state's efforts for rural broadband expansion. I had a chance to be alongside Governor Evers in some of our most difficult moments during the pandemic, and also heading up some of that Main Street bounce back work. And when I wasn't right alongside Governor Evers, he trusted me to go out on my own to lead other initiatives in the state as well, like financial literacy, which in Milwaukee was a big deal because we were able to get young people engaged in new conversations about controlling their finances. We work with a lot of different financial institutions across the state. And the list goes on and on. Like I kept myself very, very busy during Lieutenant Governor 1. Like I said, I wanted to learn, but also like I wanted to make sure that there was a level of impact in an office that had typically been overlooked, or an office that had been typically dormant in terms of activity. But it all comes down to the relationship with the governor. If you got a bad relationship with your governor, chances are you aren't going to do much as lieutenant governor. But we knew each other before taking office, and that's why I was able to be so active across Wisconsin.
Thank you. So if anyone saw me skipping a couple questions, it's because they were somewhat repetitive of other questions we had talked, and there were like 2 blank ones in there. So I'm not trying to like.
That means I get to say what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. Blank slate. What do you want to say? Now, this next question: how will you handle the ICE problem?
ICE has been a problem for so long. And if you remember back in 22, I got attacked about being very critical of ICE, and what they're doing isn't anything new. Like, when Trump has been in office, ICE has been a rogue agency that has served at his discretion, has served as his private military force, as a private police force that has no accountability except to him. Now, I will say the rot is much deeper than ICE. The problem is a lack of comprehensive immigration reform in this country. And there have been Democrats and there have been Republicans who have kicked the can down the road for far too long because they could not come up with a politically viable solution. And it has made people's lives worse. We do not have a just and humane immigration enforcement system in Wisconsin. And that can only change at the federal level. Because if ICE were to go away today, it would come back even worse with Donald Trump and Markwayne Mullin. What needs to happen is complete and total reform at the Department of Homeland Security. And we need real legislation on the books from Congress to implement actual immigration reform that treats people like humans. We have seen an agency that has been so rogue. There has been loss of life, not even loss of life. People's lives have been taken in this country. People who are here legally, whether it was in Maine most recently, whether it was in Texas before that, or Minnesota. But even before that, U.S. citizens were being detained based on the color of their skin or the language that they speak. And this makes communities less trustful of law enforcement in general, which ultimately makes us all less safe. As governor, there is a responsibility to stand strong, one, not just in the face of ICE, but the federal government, a White House that operates by vendetta. We saw the examples with J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. We saw the examples in Minnesota with Tim Walz. You have to say no. You have to say no to a rogue agency and a rogue federal government, a rogue White House, a president who only wants to instill fear in communities. This isn't about doing the right thing. We can all agree if a person's committed a violent crime and they're not in the country legally, of course, yeah, they should be deported. But that's not what's happening. We're talking about people with either minor or no real criminal infraction who are dealing with the brunt of ICE's activity. So, of course, no. And like in Milwaukee, they shouldn't be masked, but at the same time, they are going against city ordinances in Milwaukee. And if ICE runs afoul of the law, if they run afoul of the Constitution, they need to be held criminally liable. They need to be prosecuted. And in terms of cooperation with local law enforcement, if it's not a dangerous or heinous crime, there should be no cooperation.
All right, thank you. Next question we have. How do you distinguish yourself based on your policies from the other candidates for governor?
So in terms of policy, rarely is there a whole lot of sunlight. But what I can say is it comes down to the experience. It comes down to having a real presence across the state. There's not a single person who's traveled this state more than I have. There's not a person who's built the relationships more than I have across Wisconsin. And when it comes to policy, it comes down primarily to the approach and how urgent we can be. It comes down to what those relationships are like in the state legislature. It comes down to who has put forth the most bold policy in the past and who is ready to go on day one. I am the person who is ready to go on day one. I'm the only person in this race that has gone through an executive budget. And that's one of the things that comes down to having trust with the governor. I was in those budget meetings every single day, even when I didn't want to be. I was in those budget meetings going line by line, determining how we were going to prioritize the people of Wisconsin and do right by our children specifically, but also how would we shift that dynamic that we had experienced for the 8 years prior to us taking office. I'm the only person in this race who's had to come in and clean up a mess of a former Republican governor. I'm the only person in this race who was a part of taking on and defeating a Republican governor. And that's what it comes down to for me. Because if you look at policy issues, even if there is sunlight, some of it is, comes down to not necessarily the policy itself, but some of it is personality, and some of it is process. But I can tell you right now, as a person who wants to see every single person in Wisconsin have access to quality and affordable health care, who wants to make sure that there is no such thing as medical debt and medical bankruptcy in Wisconsin, that's what sets me apart. A person who is going to fight and a person who has fought. Like I said, I've taken on those tough fights before. And sometimes when you take on the tough fights, you don't win. But it's important to be in it in the first place. And having been in those tough fights is what gives me the resolve to continue to see it through until we have victory. I was around campaigning in 2010, to try to stop Scott Walker from becoming governor. I was campaigning as a legislator in 2014 to try to stop his reelection. In 2012, even during the recall, we were unsuccessful in those tough fights. But I continued to show up in 2018 when we finally defeated him and ushered in a new era in Wisconsin. Now, we have an opportunity to usher in an even newer era of opportunity. We use the foundation, the building blocks that we've already put in place, the relationships, the political infrastructure to deliver real change. And this is not just about me getting elected governor. This is about bringing about a majority in the state assembly and a majority in the state senate so we can actually govern. And I am the candidate with the political experience, having won and having lost. Having been in a hostile legislature that Robin Voss had complete control over, having been there every step of the way, fighting for better, demanding better, being told no, but not taking that no for an answer, I think that is the ultimate difference in this race.
All right, next question we have here. Do you have any thoughts on controlling housing costs in the future?
So housing costs are artificially inflated, as we know. And one of the biggest drivers in that artificial inflation is the fact that housing is commoditized. It's become another poker chip for the wealthiest individuals. It's not just having a place to live. It's not just about having shelter. This is, and obviously owning a home helps, a person or a family create generational wealth. But the fact that we have private equity showing up in communities, buying homes and housing stock in mass with cash, that's kept so many people away from ever being able to own their first home. And that is one of the things we have to do. We have to get private equity out of the mix. And we also have to build more homes. We have to create more housing density. So whether you're purchasing a home or whether you're renting a home, the more options you have, the lower costs will be. And this is the same thing that we are experiencing in healthcare. With fewer options in the health insurance market, these providers can charge whatever they want to charge because of a lack of competition. And so for housing, we have to build more, start out, get private equity out of the mix, and we have to look at some examples that have proven effective for some folks. I was just talking to some members of the Credit Union League, and I was talking to some folks over at Habitat for Humanity, and they have a specified number of very low interest loans that they get to offer every single year. Now, this is something that could be replicated at Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. Housing is right in the name, but the housing component has been primarily reserved for developers. And this goes back to the system that we're in that prioritizes wealth over actually building community. Those tax incentives, those tax credits, and that lending authority shouldn't just be reserved for developers. It should be available to potential home buyers. It should be available to young folks who want to get that first home, people who've been typically priced out of the market, and we have to make it easier for people to be able to get that down payment. And being able to cover that down payment would go along. Some people might qualify for a loan, but they can't get the down payment. That prohibits them from being able to purchase that first home. And so the path to home ownership is not as clear as it should be, but using the resources we have now and the lending authority that we have now to be able to offer those loans is something that we shouldn't just look into. Like there's not like a whole lot of research needs to be done here. As a state, we need to go forward and work with our lending authorities, our credit unions who are already doing that work to a degree and providing services, especially in communities that are looking for specific professions. Communities that are short educators, communities that are short healthcare professionals. We need to make it easier for folks to be able to buy homes in those areas, and I think that would be the best start for us to rebounding a lot of rural communities that have been on decline, but also to help people get into home ownership.
All right, another question. If elected, what are your highest priorities for addressing the remedially needy school children in Wisconsin primary grades in public schools? Sorry, I had a little struggle reading it, but I think I got that right.
I think so. So I'll answer the question I think I heard. It was about the needs of children in primary school, and I'm so glad this question came up because every time we talk about education, the conversation is specifically about curriculum. It's specifically about outcomes, which are very important things. But so many of our children are not showing up to school on level playing field, on level playing ground. We have an absurd amount of child poverty in certain communities here in Wisconsin. And if our students, I guess I'll give you another statistic, because when I was in the assembly, there was a point where 1 out of 19 students in Milwaukee public schools was homeless. That is over 5% of the student population that shows up at an immediate disadvantage. And if you are expecting those students to have the same reading scores or the same test scores as students who go to school 5 miles down the road in more wealthy school districts, you are kidding yourselves. You are expecting the almost impossible. Now, while there are children who are still figuring it out despite their circumstances, that is a lot to expect from any child. There are studies after studies that show just ridiculously low reading scores for a number of our students, and we should never be comfortable with that. But rarely do people scratch beneath the surface. I was talking with some teachers and even administrators, over the years, and they mentioned that there's a vision center that came in and provided eye examinations for the students. Lo and behold, there was an almost identical number of students with low reading scores as there were students with just poor vision. And so these are some of the root causes that we actually have to look deeper into, because poverty has an impact. Lack of access to healthcare has an impact on the way that our students learn. And if all of our children aren't equipped before they show up to school and once they leave the school building, then we are not doing the job that we should be doing as a society to make sure that every child has access and opportunity to learn. It is just such a dichotomy that it feels like we are setting up so many of our students for failure. It doesn't matter if you bring in the best tutors or the best teachers if that learning isn't reinforced, or if our students are, doing their homework on an empty stomach. It's not going to have the impact that you think it is. And so I always talk about the need for us to address poverty as a root cause of so many of our other issues and challenges that we're dealing with. But yes, we do need full funding for our public schools. I'm a proud Milwaukee public school graduate, and my school was one of those schools that did not have the resources and support that we needed. My school was one of those schools with a low graduation rate. My school was one of those schools where there were challenges that my classmates dealt with that I did not have to deal with. And that's ultimately what made the biggest difference in our educational outcomes. I didn't have to worry about where I was going to sleep at night. Didn't have to worry about where my next meal was going to come from. And that was just not the case for too many people that I was in school with. And the way you saw that reflected was in those graduation rates, was in those standardized test scores. I deeply, to my core, do not feel as if we are grading our children based on the right or proper rubric.
I appreciate that. That was a thoughtful answer. I think often people just say, we just need more money. And then
we do.
That too.
We do need more money. But there are other issues too, social workers in schools. We dealt with some real stuff in my high school. My freshman year, I had lost friends to gun violence. My first year in high school, I don't ever remember there being, grief counselors coming in to school to help us manage that, to help us deal with that. And, I think about the one friend in particular. His siblings were at the school, and our English teacher talked him through it. That wasn't her job. And I even think about him to this day. He was the person who lost his life to gun violence. One of the smartest people. Truly, one of the people who was not even in the wrong scene. It was something that should have just never ever happened. He was not involved in the wrong crowd by any means. His brothers, very smart, talented people. After that happened, they were just not the same person. How I don't know that. I'm not gonna say I don't know. I'm certain that's something they never were able to overcome.
All right, I think we have time for one more audience question, and then we'll give you a chance for any last words you got. If you were governor today, what would you be doing to assure Wisconsin can vote freely and that our votes are protected once cast?
Yes, democracy reform is one of the most important things we can do. Since I've been out of office, I've also been a part of a group called the Democracy Defense Project. And that is a bipartisan board that I sat on. It was former party officials or elected officials, 2 from each party. Actually, former Republican attorney J.B. Van Hollen was a part of that board. Somebody I never thought I'd be on a board with, but the reason the organization existed was to combat the big lie and to hold accountable people who want to call our election integrity into question, but to also push our leaders, to push our legislators to implement policy that protects the vote and protects the integrity of the vote. A couple things we need here in Wisconsin: automatic voter registration. We also need pre-registration for young people. People who are 16, they get pre-registered, so when they're 18, they will be ready to vote. And we need to update our vote-by-mail systems. We need to keep our early vote drop boxes as well. One thing, Wisconsin, we are a bit ahead of the curve. We're doing a lot better than many other states, but that doesn't mean we should just be comfortable with it. Doesn't mean we should just rest easy with the fact that we have better voting laws than a lot of other places, but to also strengthen democracy and to help alleviate a lot of the skepticism. Milwaukee needs to be able to count those early vote ballots before Election Day, because it leaves too much room for nefarious interpretation, where people say, oh, well, there's a pickup truck with ballots just showed up, and now the vote total in Milwaukee is different. Well, no, those ballots are already cast. We just can't count them before the election. So being able to count those ballots before would help alleviate the concerns. And we also need to do a little bit better staffing in our clerk's offices to make sure that they have the resource they need and they aren't stressed out on Election Day. And one, I could be wrong about the state, but I believe it's Nebraska. They have compulsory election service work. Just like you would get called for jury duty, you get called to be an election a poll worker. You have to do it. And I think the more people that have access to the process, more people that actually see an election run, they see how boring it is, and they see how unlikely it is that something weird is going on. So that's one thing I would like to see here in Wisconsin. You get called up to be a poll worker just like you would get called up for jury duty.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate you, fighting the good fight over all these years, and all the great work you've done, and coming all the way up to Mount Horeb, and you didn't break your arm?
I didn't break my arm.
Yeah, not yet. I'm careful. There's a step there, but but yeah, if you have any last words for us, anything you want us to remember when we go to the ballot.
Absolutely.
What is it? It's August 11th.
August
right?
11th, 3 weeks and 6 days. So even about the breaking the arm piece, this is like my healthcare story. I racked up so much medical debt when I broke my arm. I was under the age of 26, theoretically should have been under my parents' health insurance, but it was one of the things where my mother's insurance tried to push it on my dad's insurance and vice versa. And I lived with this debt for so long. And it's because insurance companies don't want to live up to their responsibilities, and there needs to be real accountability there. But just certainly want to thank everybody for taking the time to come out tonight. And as we say, every election is the most important of our lifetime. But this one, it feels more so than others. When I was elected lieutenant governor in 2018, Donald Trump was president. And we experienced what we thought was the absolute worst. And now that he is back in office, we see that there is another level beneath the bottom. We have to fight back with everything we have. When we say our democracy is on the line, it's not a joke. When we talk about free and fair elections, if we don't get this right across the entire country, that could be the case. But specifically here in Wisconsin, the swing state that we are, where a governor could ultimately at least attempt, if not successfully, overturn an election result, we need to show up with everything that we have. This is a fight for our lives. This is a fight for our future. This is a tough fight. And as I've stated earlier, I'm not afraid of the tough fights. I've even started some of those fights on my own. But I would do it all again because I'm constantly reminded of the folks who I've spent the majority of my life around who've never had a person to show up to fight for them, especially somebody in elected office. This is a moment for Wisconsin to stand up like we've never stood up before. This is a moment for us to get back to our proud progressive roots, our proud progressive traditions. We've done incredibly bold things before in the face of adversity. Wisconsin has truly met the moment so many times in the past, but we can't just allow that to only be our past. It has to be our future. If you think about the fact that we were the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, the fact that we were the first state to declare the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional, the fact that we were the first state to have anti-discrimination laws based on sexual orientation and anti-discrimination laws based on ability on the books. We have always done the bold thing, and we have met the moment. This November is our opportunity to meet that moment once again. I'd be so honored to have your support along the way.
Thank you so much. Thanks again to Mandela Barnes, and that's it for tonight. Thanks everybody for coming out.